Like I imagine many of you, have a Garmin. I've had a Garmin now for 15 years, 2007, whatever that is. And of course, Apple Watch, Fitbit, there's a variety of other. Because of those, we tend to become pretty married to miles and pace when it comes to our training. But the fact is, training is not about pace, it's about effort. It's not about miles, it's about duration. Now, miles is a little bit less of an issue than the pace, but the effort is really important because in the end, you're trying to improve your system for running. And your mind doesn't know anything about miles and pace. Your body is going to react to the stress you've put on it from an effort standpoint and for how long that you have done that effort. So, in general, there's more to it than this, but in general, when you're doing running, you're training your aerobic system. That's the far and away the most training that you're doing for distance running. You're training the lactate system. I'm calling it oxygen consumption, but then I'm going to refer to it as VO2 max, but it's your ability to take in oxygen. There's some neurological training, that's training your muscles, how they fire. And there's some brain training. I'm not talking a lot about that, but there certainly are some runs that are done for your head to make your brain kind of get on board with doing things. Probably the easy example of that would be, in general, there's no reason to do a long run that's much longer than about 2 hours and 45 minutes, 3 hours. Depending upon your pace, you might not be able to get to 20 miles on that, and sometimes there's a big benefit to doing 20 miles for your brain. It really doesn't do anything from a physiological standpoint. So the whole idea here is then when you're running, you're trying to stress some system. You're trying to stress the aerobic system. You're trying to stress that lactate system, whatever. You recover from that. I'm not talking about recovery, you stop, take a break, and go. But over the next few days, you recover from that and you repeat. Again, you don't repeat it immediately, but is it that constant cycle of stressing a system, your body makes it a little bit better, then you stress it again, your body makes it a little better. That's what helps you become a better runner. And your body is reacting to whatever stress you put on it, and pace may not always give you the right stress. Heart rate might not give you the right stress. Power might. There's no one magic way to always make sure that you're trying to get the right stress. But that's what you want to endeavor to do, is get that effort right, because that's what your body goes to. So let me give you an example of some pancakes I make. I use a pancake mix. It takes 1 cup of mix, 3/4 cup of water, 1 egg, 1 tablespoon of oil. Now, I could make the pancakes with a different recipe. I could instead say, well, I'm only going to give it a 1/2 cup of mix, a cup of water, 2 eggs, and 2 tablespoons of oil. The problem is those pancakes wouldn't taste very good because that's not the right recipe. Well, your training is like that as well. You have a mix of different things in varying amounts. In general, those top two, the aerobic work, you're going to have a lot of that. You really don't need a lot of the lactate work or the neurological work or the VO2 max work. Those are usually in much smaller amounts, but when you add them all together, you get delicious pancakes. But when you get the effort wrong, then again, those pancakes aren't going to taste very good. So I'll give you a quick example with me. So my aerobic range from a pace standpoint would be about 740 to 930. My lactate is about 710. My VO2 max, that oxygen consumption, is about 640. And for the neurological work, I'd want to be at about 615. Those paces are just designed to get me at the right effort. And those paces pretty much assume that everything is perfect, so to speak, that there's nothing else going on. If there's other things going on, then you have to adjust those paces to get the right effort. That could be faster. It's more likely going to be slower, but it could be faster. So an example, let's say that my training says I should be running 3 miles at 7:10. You're really looking at duration, but we tend to use miles, so I used miles. But let's say the temperature outside is 75 degrees and 93% humidity. That means a 7:10 effort is likely around a 7:30 pace. If I'm going, oh, I got to run 7:10. I've got this race coming up. I really want to be ready. I want a PR. Well, then instead of running at a 7:10, I'm probably running that closer to 6:50, 6:45, which was my oxygen consumption. And 30 or 20 minutes at that is way too much work to be doing at that level. So now I've done more work than I needed to. I'm going to be more fatigued than I need to be. And I've worked the entire wrong energy system. It's going back to the pancake recipe and putting in the wrong ingredients. So what are some things, other than I used heat and humidity, that are going to affect you? There's a bunch of them. Hills make a big difference. Heat, and I separated out sun differently because if you're in a pounding down sun, even if the temperature says 65 degrees, that sun may make it effectively 70 degrees. You have humidity, you have other stress, and other stress is a really big category because your body doesn't know where the stress is coming from. It's just reacting from the stress. So if you've got a lot of things going on in your life, maybe a loved one is in the hospital, that's going to matter. You haven't been sleeping well. You haven't been eating well. There's so many things that enter into that all factor into how do I get the right effort so that I'm getting the right stress on my body so that recovery. So I'll give you some examples. And I think I got, the last thing before I get to the examples, if you're doing lactate type work, if you're doing VO2 max type work, ideally, I would try and do those flat. I know a lot of people live in hilly areas and that can be tough to do, but the reason is most of that work is really short in nature, and it's very hard to get at the right effort when you have to deal with hills. So if you can do flat, it's a lot easier. When you're talking about long runs, easy runs, it's a little bit easier to gauge that effort with the hills, but if at all possible, even if it means in a parking lot, try and get that work on flat because it's easier to control the effort. So if you've got aerobic work, your talk test is known as paragraphs, meaning you should generally be able to speak in a complete paragraph before you have to gasp for breath. Now, you might remember my aerobic range is really big, which means if for some reason I'm supposed to be at the faster end of my aerobic range, I might not be getting a full paragraph, but I should for sure be getting 2 or 3 sentences. On the other hand, if it's at the slower end or even a recovery run, then for sure you should be able to get that out. A common test is, can you sing the happy birthday song without gasping for breath? And I'll tell you, people miss this a lot. When I used to work with large training groups, I would get people all the time on a long run going, see, this is a really comfortable pace for me. I could talk like this for my entire run. No, that's not a comfortable pace. They're gasping for breath every few words. The effort is just too hard. They're not going to be stressing the right system. Now, if you're working on lactate, that's your body's ability to clear lactate out of your system. You're always clearing lactate, but lactate is where you're really producing a lot of it. You're trying to teach your body how to be really effective at removing that. The talk test there would be a sentence pace, meaning generally you don't want to talk, but if you could, you ought to be able to get out a sentence, maybe a sentence and a half before you have to take that gasp for breath. So my 7-10 example was that. I'll guarantee you, if I tried to keep a 7-10 in 75 degrees and 93% humidity, I might be at the sentence test the first mile. I'm not going to be there by the end. By the end, I'm going to be down to words. I'm barely able to talk. Why? Because the effort is wrong. I'm talking too hard. For VO2 max, I almost skipped by that one. That's a words one. Now that can be a little bit harder because those are typically short bouts of about 3 to 5 minutes at that really fast effort. But by the end of that, it's like, I don't want to talk at all, but I could probably spit out a few words. If you can't talk at all, you're probably not getting enough effort. On the other hand, if you can get out a sentence, you're maybe back to lactate. You're not getting quite enough effort in that. And the final guideline that I'll give, this will apply a little bit more to longer runs and easy runs, but it does apply to all of them. In general, you should never be gassed at the end. So if your goal is to, for example, say do a long run and it's 15 miles and you're supposed to be at a 9-minute pace to get that right effort, if you find that you're at 9 minutes for the first part of it, but then from mile 11 on you go to 9:05, 9:10, you get it back to 9, then you're down to 9:20 and you're starting to slow down, and when that run is done, you're wiped out, you're gassed, then your effort was too hard. In general, you should always finish any workout, including track workout, saying, it's okay to say, I want to be done, but if somebody said, hey, you've got to do one more 800 meter, you've got to do one more mile on your long run, you should still be able to do that at the same effort that was prescribed before, and if you've gassed, then you've probably gotten the wrong effort from that and overshot it. So last, I talked a little bit about duration. So long runs are generally 90 plus minutes. Obviously, you have other aerobic runs, easier runs that are shorter than that, but a long run really begins at about 90 minutes. There are certain physiological adaptations that happen after you get to 90 minutes. So when I'm prescribing training for people and I'm doing their long runs, I give it to them mostly in miles because people like miles. But I always work backwards. I say, okay, what's the pace effort I think they're going to run at? How many miles will get me the number of minutes I want today, whether it's 90 minutes, 120 minutes, 230 minutes, whatever that might be. But it's really about the duration. It's not the miles. If you're working with lactate, it's probably 20 to 30 minutes, more likely 20. A lot of people will never get to 30, and if they do, it's really only towards the very end of training. But it's generally 20 minutes of sustained running. VO2 max work is only about 12 minutes. Now, the bouts are typically 3 to 5 minutes long. And in that 3 to 5 minutes, you're not at your VO2 max the entire time. You only get there a portion of the time. So you might actually have somewhere between maybe 15 and 30 minutes of work, so to speak, but not all of it attributes to VO2 max. But it's the same thing. When I'm looking at training for somebody, I ask myself, how long or how much do I want? I want 18 minutes. They're going to be running for this amount of time. Therefore, it's this many intervals. It always works back because it's about duration. And then finally, if you're doing neurological work, which is training the muscle fibers, how to fire, boom, 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 it's very fast, quick work. Put that down too quick. That's typically less than 2 minutes about. We generally in distance running don't do a lot of that. Strides is a good example. Strides are usually something like 20 to 30 seconds. They're very, very short. But the same thing, it's about a duration. It's not necessarily about miles, so to speak. So that's a little bit about why it's not about pace. It's about effort. It's not about miles. It's about duration. Because when you get the right mix of all those, you make some pretty good pancakes.